Tonight, I'm sharing 4 stories that will make you question every late-night Uber or Lyft ride you've ever taken. The first comes from a driver who thought he was just picking up another fare until he realized the passenger sitting in his car didn't exist on the app at all. And before we begin, if stories like these keep you hooked, hit subscribe and ring the bell. I post new true-style horror stories every single day. This account comes from Ryan, a 34-year-old Uber driver out of Chicago. Ryan isn't the kind of guy you'd expect to have stories like this. He's not reckless, not the type to exaggerate. He works a full-time job at a hardware store, has a small apartment on the south side, and drives nights for extra cash. He says it keeps him busy, keeps his mind quiet. He's the kind of person who notices details, license plates, strange coincidences, the way someone talks. He keeps a notebook in his glove box for jotting down odd conversations, weird passengers, even fragments of songs he hears on the radio at 3 a.m. He calls it his night shift diary. Most of his entries are boring. A drunk guy falling asleep mid-ride, a college kid rapping along to a song, a woman who spilled coffee on herself and apologized 10 times. But a few stand out. And one, he says, is the reason he doesn't drive anymore. It was a Thursday in November, just after midnight. The weather was bad for pedestrians, cold, damp, the streets still slick from earlier rain. Ryan liked nights like that. It meant fewer rides, but it also meant quieter roads, less chaos. He logged into the Uber app at 12:06 a.m., his phone mounted on the dash. His first ping came from West Exchange Avenue, a part of the city most people don't go unless they have to. It used to be packed with factories and slaughterhouses, but now it's mostly warehouses, half-demolished buildings, and streets that feel like they forgot what it was like to be busy. The app showed the rider's name as David. No profile picture, just a name. Ryan drove out, his wipers squeaking across the windshield even though the rain had stopped hours earlier. When he pulled up to the pin, his headlights cut across a boarded-up building with a faded sign he couldn't read. No one was there. Then, from the shadows, a man stepped out. Tall, lean, wearing a gray coat with the collar turned up. His hair was dark, wet from mist, and he moved with a strange kind of deliberation. No rush, no hesitation. He lifted his hand slightly, not waving, just acknowledging. Ryan unlocked the back door. The man slid in without a word. The car dipped under his weight, the leather seat creaking faintly. Ryan checked his rear view. The man sat upright, face pale in the dim light, eyes shadowed under his brow. His hands rested neatly on his knees. Ryan tapped Arrived on the app, then hit Start Ride, except the screen blinked. Then it went back to the home page. No active ride. Ryan frowned, refreshed, still nothing. The request had vanished. He glanced at the mirror. Did you cancel? The app dropped you." The man's voice was low, calm, deliberate. "No, just drive." Ryan hesitated. He knew he wasn't supposed to drive without a logged ride. No accountability, no record, no protection. But something in the man's voice made him shift into gear anyway. "Where to?" Ryan asked. The man tilted his head slightly. "North. I'll tell you when to turn." Ryan pulled away. The city at night has layers. Downtown was still glowing in the distance, alive with hotels and late-night bars, but here the streets were empty, the lights uneven. Old storefronts with gates drawn down, graffiti scrawled over brick, windows hollow. The car's engine echoed off the walls louder than he liked.
Ryan tried to keep it casual. "You live around here?" The man didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the window, though there wasn't much to see but reflections of the dashboard lights. Ryan drummed his fingers on the wheel. Normally, he'd leave silence alone, but something about this ride made him itch for normal conversation. "Weather's brutal this week. At least it's not snow yet." The man finally spoke, voice soft. "Not yet." Ryan felt his throat tighten. He flicked his eyes to the mirror. The man hadn't moved. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, Ryan swore they were too pale, gray, almost cloudy, like storm water. Ryan turned onto 43rd when the man said, "Left here." The street was darker, only one lamp lit, buzzing faintly. Ryan glanced at his phone. No signal, not even GPS, just a gray screen. He tapped it, cursed under his breath. Weird spot for a dead zone. The man leaned slightly forward. His breath fogged faintly in the air, even though the heat was on. This street used to be alive. Bars, shops, lights, people walking late. Yeah, haven't seen it like that in my lifetime. The man's eyes flicked up to the mirror again. They glinted faintly in the dashboard glow. Not gone, not yet. Ryan gripped the wheel tighter. "You mean gentrification, or—" The man cut him off. "Straight." So Ryan drove straight. The street narrowed, the buildings leaning in closer, their windows like empty sockets. His headlights swept across an old brick archway where the name had long since worn away. The man whispered almost to himself, "They don't take this way anymore." Ryan cleared his throat. "Who doesn't?" The man's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Drivers." Ryan's chest tightened. He flicked his eyes back to the phone, and for a half-second the ride screen reappeared. But the name wasn't David anymore. It wasn't anything. The profile photo was a gray silhouette. The rider name, just an empty line. His stomach flipped. He smacked the screen with his palm, trying to reset it. The display went black. He checked the mirror. The man's seat was empty. The gray coat, the pale eyes, gone. Ryan slammed the brakes, tires squealing on wet pavement. His pulse hammered against his ribs, a cold sweat running down his back. He twisted around, yanking open the back door. Nothing. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, like the basement of an old building. Ryan sat frozen, fingers trembling against the wheel. Then his eyes fell to the glove box. His notebook had slid partly open. On the last page, in handwriting he didn't recognize, 3 words stared back. "Don't drive back." Ryan slammed the glove box shut. He floored it, spinning back toward the main roads, not daring to look at the mirror again. When he got home that night, he parked his car 3 blocks away and walked. He said he couldn't bring himself to park in front of his apartment, couldn't risk the idea of looking out his window and seeing a man in a gray coat standing under the streetlight. Ryan hasn't picked up a ride since. He still has the notebook, though. He showed it to me once. The last page has those words. The ink is dark, almost too dark, like it was pressed into the paper with force. And Ryan swears on everything he has, he didn't write them.
This account comes from Malik, a Brooklyn rideshare driver who, by his own admission, isn't easily rattled. He's 38, works security at a warehouse during the day, drives Uber at night, and keeps his life simple. He has a son who stays with him every other weekend, a small two-bedroom apartment off Church Avenue, and the kind of routine that dulls the edges of loneliness. Malik started driving for Uber 2 years earlier, mostly to supplement his income. He liked it because it gave him noise, movement, conversation, the sense that he wasn't sitting alone in an empty apartment with muted TV reruns filling the silence. Driving strangers meant he could brush against other people's lives without the burden of being part of them. They'd talk, he'd listen, and then they'd vanish into the city. Most rides were forgettable. He'd joke sometimes that his life was measured in half-heard phone calls and the smell of other people's cologne. But one ride never left him. One night, he swears, a woman sat in his back seat for nearly 20 minutes, talking to him like she'd known him for years. And when he arrived at her destination, the seat was empty, her name erased from the app, and only a satchel with a note left behind to prove she had ever been there at all. It was a humid Thursday in July, the kind of night where even the asphalt seemed to sweat. Malik had worked a long day at the warehouse, 10 hours on his feet, checking deliveries and scanning IDs, but he logged in to drive anyway. He always did. He started his shift with a Dunkin' iced coffee balanced precariously in the cup holder and his phone mounted to the dash. He told himself he'd do just 4 or 5 rides, a little extra cash, nothing heavy. The city was restless that night. Sirens in the distance, teenagers popping fireworks too early for summer, the smell of food carts lingering at corners. He picked up a nurse from the hospital, a drunk couple arguing about pizza, a quiet old man with a shopping bag full of newspapers. By the time the ping came through, pickup, Carroll Gardens, rider, Elena, it was almost midnight. He thought about rejecting it, but Carroll Gardens was close, and Flatbush wasn't far from his apartment. Perfect last ride before heading home. The pin dropped in front of a brownstone with wide steps and a wrought iron fence. The street was lined with leafy trees, their branches low and heavy with the night's humidity. She stepped out almost as soon as he pulled up. No hesitation, no scanning the license plate like most riders. She looked like she was in her early 30s. Dark hair pinned into a bun, a pale linen dress that clung lightly to her skin in the thick air. She carried a small leather satchel, the kind that seemed older than she was, but well kept, as if it meant something to her. She opened the back door with ease, slid in, and offered him a polite smile. "Thanks for coming so quick." Her voice was soft but confident, with that scratchy undertone of someone who worked long days. "No problem," Malik said, tapping the app. "Where are we headed?" "Flatbush, off Dorchester Road," she said. "My phone died right before I booked, but the address should have gone through." It had. The route glowed on his screen, a 20-minute drive. From the start, she wasn't like most passengers. She didn't bury herself in her phone. She didn't sit in silence. She talked. She leaned forward slightly, her perfume drifting into the air, floral, sharp, almost metallic. She asked him if he'd been driving long, if he liked it, if the nights felt lonelier than the days. Malik wasn't usually one to open up, but he found himself talking to her. He told her about his son, about how the divorce still left gaps in his routine, about how he sometimes drove just to avoid sitting in his apartment listening to the refrigerator hum. She listened closely, nodding, even laughing at his story about forgetting his lunch on the roof of his car and watching it slide off 3 blocks later. At one point, as they idled at a red light, she asked, "Do you ever feel like some passengers don't belong here?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" Her face was reflected in the rearview mirror, half in shadow, eyes glinting faintly in the passing light.
"Like they're not really part of this city," she said softly. "Like they're just passing through?" Malik gave a small chuckle, uneasy. "You mean like tourists?" But she didn't laugh. She leaned back into the shadows of the back seat and didn't clarify. Halfway through the ride, something happened that Malik would later call the first crack. The app glitched. The route line blinked, then went gray. The top bar no longer showed Elena, just a blank space. He tapped the screen. Nothing. The GPS spun and stuttered. "That's new," he muttered. She didn't react. She was watching the passing streets, her expression distant, almost wistful, as if she were remembering something from long ago. Malik glanced in the mirror. "You okay back there?" She smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm fine." Her voice was calm, but something in it felt heavy, weighted, as though it carried too much meaning for such simple words. He tried to shake it off. "So, publishing, huh? What do you do there?" She blinked, startled, as if she hadn't expected him to remember what she'd mentioned earlier. "I'm an editor. Or was. Was." Her lips curved faintly. "Let's just say the hours caught up with me." Malik didn't push, but he noticed her hands, pale against the satchel, fingers curled tight around the strap, as if she were holding on to something much heavier than a bag. "Flatbush is home?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. Then after a pause, "At least it used to be." The streets grew quieter as they drove south. Fewer people on the sidewalks, fewer lights and windows. Brooklyn at night can feel like 100 different cities stitched together. Noisy blocks fading suddenly into silence, bright corners plunging into shadow. The air in the car felt heavier. Malik rolled his window slightly, but the humidity clung stubbornly. The faint scent of her perfume filled the space, stronger now, almost overwhelming. They passed an old church, its bell tower looming dark against the sky. She leaned toward the window, whispering something Malik almost didn't catch. "They never fixed the clock." He glanced at her reflection in the rear view. Her lips moved, but her eyes weren't on the church. They were on him. Finally, they reached Dorchester Road. The houses sagged on their foundations, porches stooped, paint peeling. Laundry lines swayed in the faint night breeze. The GPS blinked back on, showing the drop-off just a block ahead. "All right," Malik said, forcing cheer into his voice. "Almost there." No answer. He glanced in the mirror. The back seat was empty. The pale linen dress, the satchel, the perfume, gone. The leather seat was smooth, unwrinkled, as if no one had ever been sitting there. Malik's chest seized. He swerved to the curb, heart hammering in his throat. He turned fully in his seat, staring at the cushions, the floor mats. Nothing. But on the seat was the satchel. Small, leather, neat. Malik's hands trembled as he picked it up. It was impossibly light. Inside was only a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it under the yellow glare of a streetlight. In neat, deliberate handwriting, it read, "Thank you for the ride. Don't drive alone tonight." Malik sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the note, the humid air pressing against his skin. His first thought was to throw the bag into the gutter, drive home, never speak of it. But something made him put it in the trunk instead, as if discarding it would be worse. When he checked the app later, there was no record of the ride. No Elena. No Carroll Gardens pickup. Nothing. He stopped driving for 2 weeks. Couldn't bring himself to log back in. Every time he opened the back door of his car, he half expected to see her sitting there again, linen dress neat, hands folded on the satchel,
eyes too calm for the noise of Brooklyn. The satchel sat in his closet. He couldn't throw it away, couldn't open it again, couldn't even bring himself to touch the note. Sometimes when the apartment was too quiet, he swore he smelled that perfume again. Sharp, floral, metallic, lingering in the hall long after he'd walked through it. And once, weeks later, he opened his son's backpack after a weekend visit to find a scrap of folded paper tucked inside. In the same handwriting, "You listened. That's good." He never told his son. He never drove Uber again. This account comes from Adrian, a 42-year-old Lyft driver who's lived in Brooklyn his whole life. Unlike Ryan and Malik, Adrian wasn't driving part-time or as a side hustle. For him, Lyft was survival. He'd been laid off from a catering company 2 years earlier, and while he applied for jobs constantly, nothing stuck. So he turned his beat-up Toyota Camry into his livelihood, driving 7 nights a week. Adrian isn't the type of person who frightens easily. He grew up in Brownsville in the 90s, watched his neighborhood change block by block, and spent most of his life navigating the kind of nights that teach you to be careful but not paranoid. If you kept your head low and your eyes open, you'd be fine, he said. But one night in particular convinced him that some things in the city can't be explained by instinct, by logic, or by the street smarts he'd built over a lifetime. He usually started shifts around 7 p.m., fueled by bodega coffee and dollar pizza. He kept a playlist of old-school hip-hop mixed with 80s R&B, saying it calmed him when traffic made his jaw clench. He'd keep a picture of his daughter tucked into the visor. She was 19, in college upstate, and the one thing that made him smile on nights when the city felt especially heavy. By 11 p.m. that July night, he'd already done a dozen rides, mostly short hops, people leaving bars, workers hitting home from late shifts, the usual. His Camry smelled faintly of air freshener and coffee, the faint hum of the AC struggling against the muddy air outside. Then the ping came through. Pickup, Bushwick. Rider, Marcus. The drop-off address made him pause. It wasn't just unfamiliar, it didn't exist. The app showed the destination as 123 Lorne Place. Adrian squinted. He knew Brooklyn like the back of his hand, and there was no Lorne Place. He zoomed in on the map, and sure enough, the pin sat hovering on a narrow stretch between Myrtle and Broadway where there was nothing but warehouses and old brick tenements. He considered rejecting the ride, but the pickup was close and curiosity won. Probably a glitch, he muttered, pulling toward the pin. He spotted Marcus almost immediately. A man in his late 20s maybe, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie despite the heat. He stood perfectly still under a flickering streetlight, head bowed slightly as if lost in thought. When Adrian rolled up, the man looked up and smiled faintly before sliding into the back seat. "You Adrian? You Adrian?" he asked. "Yeah," Adrian said cautiously. "You Marcus?" The man nodded once. "Thanks for coming. I just need to get home." "Sure thing." Adrian glanced at the app again, the non-existent address glowing faintly. "You put in Lorne Place?" The man's expression didn't change. "Yeah, that's right." Adrian hesitated, then put the car in gear. The streets rolled by in silence at first. Adrian tried small talk. "Busy night?" The man smiled faintly. "You could say that." Adrian waited, but the passenger just stared out the window. The reflection of his face in the glass was pale, almost too pale in the orange glow of the streetlights. 10 minutes in, Adrian's phone buzzed. The app recalculated the route, but the pin didn't move. It just blinked faintly, the street name flickering between Lorne Place and blank gray. He tapped the screen. "Weird, that street doesn't even exist, man. You're sure this is right?" The man leaned forward slightly, his breath brushing the back of Adrian's neck. "It used to exist. Just drive." They turned onto Myrtle. The city thinned here. Fewer bodegas, more shuttered storefronts. graffiti covering corrugated metal gates. The sidewalks were empty, the only movement the scuttle of something small in the gutter. Adrian's gut clenched. Every instinct screamed to turn around, to drop the guy off and call it a night. But the passenger sat too calmly, too still, his hands folded neatly on his lap. At one red light, Adrian caught his eyes in the mirror. They were pale gray, almost cloudy, like cataracts. But Marcus wasn't old, not even close. Adrian looked away fast, telling himself it was just the light. Finally, the app pinged. Arrived. But they weren't anywhere. The car idled at the end of a narrow side street lined with crumbling warehouses. Half the windows were smashed, the rest bricked over. The pin floated on the map, anchored to nothing but asphalt and weeds. "This it?" Adrian asked. The man smiled faintly. "Yeah, right here's good." Adrian glanced back. "You sure? There's nothing here." The man's expression didn't change. "This is where I used to live." Adrian's chest tightened. "You mean this street?" The man's smile widened slightly. It was Lorne Place then, before they built over it, before they forgot. Adrian's skin crawled. He unlocked the doors. "Okay, well, we're here." The man didn't move. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice low. "You should go. Don't come back here." And then he was gone. Not opened the door gone, not walked away gone. Gone. The seat was empty. The faint smell of damp earth and old concrete filled the car. Adrian sat frozen for minutes, heart slamming, sweat dripping down his temples. He finally forced himself to breathe, turned the car around, and drove out fast, headlights bouncing off graffiti and broken glass. When he checked the ride history later, the trip didn't exist. No Marcus, no pickup, no Lorne Place, nothing. But his GPS history showed a route he didn't remember taking, snaking through streets he swore he hadn't turned onto, ending in a dead zone where the map went gray. Adrian quit driving a week later. He said it wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something heavier, the sense that he had driven down a street that shouldn't exist, and that the passenger who guided him there wasn't someone who belonged in this world. He still dreams about it, a narrow street lined with houses that aren't there anymore, and a man in a hoodie standing perfectly still, waiting under a flickering streetlight.
The first story involves a passenger who knew things he shouldn't have, and by the end, you'll understand why I never drive without checking my mirrors twice. And if stories like these keep you up at night, make sure you subscribe. New rideshare confessions and horror stories come every single day. This account comes from Daniel, a rideshare driver in Queens, who said he used to think nothing could surprise him after 10 years behind the wheel. But one ride changed that for good. Daniel started driving when the gig apps were still new. He'd seen it all: drunk passengers trying to light cigarettes, couples fighting in the back seat, teenagers daring each other to vomit out the window. None of it rattled him much. He was 40, a father of 2, divorced, and driving nights to fill the gaps between child support payments and rent. "I thought I'd built a thick skin," he told me. Turns out, I was wrong. It was a Friday night in September, the kind when the city doesn't seem to sleep at all. He'd been driving since 7, coffee in the console, Sinatra playing low through the speakers to calm his nerves. By 2 in the morning, he was thinking of heading home when the ping came in. Pickup in Flushing, rider named Arthur. The street was quiet when he pulled up. Storefronts shuttered, neon signs flickering, a few stragglers waiting for buses that might not come. A man stepped from the shadows of a narrow alleyway, tall, wearing a gray suit that looked a little too crisp for the hour. He slid into the back seat with an ease that suggested he'd done this 100 times. "Daniel," said the man, settling in. "Thanks for coming." Daniel blinked. His phone sat on the dash, but he hadn't given his name. Not to him, not out loud. "You, Arthur?" The man smiled faintly. "I am. And you're Daniel. Born April 9th, 1980. 2 kids, Emma and Lucas." Daniel's hands went clammy on the wheel. He pulled into traffic because the silence felt worse than movement. "How you—" The man leaned forward slightly, his reflection pale in the rearview mirror. "I read people. It's a skill." Daniel tried to laugh it off. "That's more than reading, that's knowing." The man didn't answer, just watched the city slide past the window. For the first 10 minutes, Daniel told himself it was coincidence. Maybe the app leaked his info, maybe the guy was bluffing, fishing for reactions. But then the man spoke again. "You like to park under the Triborough Bridge when you're off shift. You sit there, windows down, listening to the water. You've never told anyone that, not even your kids." Daniel's heart thudded. He gripped the wheel tighter, sweat slick on his palms. He had done that, just a handful of times, when the night felt too heavy. It wasn't a habit, wasn't something anyone could know. He forced a chuckle. "All right, Arthur. You must be some kind of psychic, huh?" Arthur's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I don't like that word. It makes it sound like a trick. I just know things." They drove on. The air in the car felt denser somehow, as if the AC couldn't cut through the heaviness. Daniel tried to keep conversation light, but the man's answers were always just a slightly off, vague, detached. When they hit a red light, Arthur leaned forward again. "Do you know why your ex-wife left you, Daniel?" Daniel's throat tightened. "We don't need to—" It wasn't the arguments. It wasn't the money. It was the silence. She couldn't stand the way you'd disappear into yourself, the way you'd sit in a room with her and still be 1,000 miles away. Daniel's hands shook. "Stop!" Arthur leaned back slowly, his face shadowed. "You asked?" I answered. The light turned green. Daniel pressed the gas too hard, the tires squealing against the asphalt. He wanted the ride over. He wanted this man out of his car. But the app didn't help. The route line glitched, blinking between streets that didn't match what he saw. At one point, the destination banner simply read, "Home." He swallowed hard. "Where exactly are we going, Arthur?" "Straight ahead," the man said softly. "I'll tell you when to stop." They drove deeper into Queens, past blocks Daniel knew well, into narrower streets lined with brownstones that looked half asleep. The man kept talking, always in that calm, even tone. "You hide cash in your glove box. $87 right now. You'll never use it. It's your emergency stash. You keep the photo of your daughter in the visor because you're afraid you'll forget her face if you don't." Daniel's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. "That's enough." But the man only smiled again, pale eyes glinting in the passing light. Finally, after nearly a half hour of driving, Arthur said, "Here, this is fine." Daniel pulled over. They were on a street he didn't recognize, lined with dark buildings, no lights, no people, just silence. The man reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out something folded, and placed it gently on the seat. "You've been kind, Daniel. Not everyone is. Keep this." Before Daniel could answer, he opened the door and stepped out. The street light overhead flickered once, and when Daniel looked back, the sidewalk was empty. He sat frozen for minutes, engine idling, breath ragged. Finally, he reached for the folded paper. His stomach lurched as he unfolded it. In neat handwriting, it read, "Your silence will save you. Don't speak of this ride." The paper was damp, as if it had been pulled from water. When Daniel checked the app later, there was no record of the ride, no Arthur, no destination, nothing.